Hey, Sopranos fans! Welcome to another episode here on Bully Whispers, and we are here today to determine which of the real five New York families the Lupertazzis most closely resemble, using Johnny Sack as the main focal point since we see the most of him. Throughout the show, the New York mob as a whole is portrayed as somewhat of a nebulous presence, almost as if it's just one family, although they do occasionally acknowledge the others.
Yeah, well, let me take this 40% bullshit and run it by the other four bosses, see if they put up with it.
But from New Jersey's standpoint, practically speaking, there's only the Lupertazzis since they're the only ones New Jersey ever really deals with. Now, there have been plenty of comparisons between the Sopranos and the real North Jersey mob, the DeCavalcanti family, specifically Tony Soprano and Vinnie Palermo. Since in real life Vinnie Palermo had a relationship with John Gotti, it makes it very easy to say, well, there you have it. Johnny Sack is a John Gotti parallel, and the Lupertazzis are the Gambinos.
Unfortunately, this crime clashed with the presence of Benoit Blanc.
Except The Sopranos is fiction, the Lupertazzis aren't based on a real family, and beyond that, it's just a lazy evaluation, since it only evaluates New York in terms of their relationship with Tony, and I want this to be from more of New York's point of view. So in this episode, we will go through the five New York families one by one, taking a look at any parallels or comparisons, starting with the Bonannos, which won't take very long. Through most of the series, other than a brief period after Carmine Sr.'s death, the Lupertazzis are portrayed as a long, stable, and highly respected family. Of course, after Johnny Sack dies, they kind of go off the rails a bit, but for the most part, that's how they're viewed. The Bonannos, on the other hand, had tremendous instability. Their namesake boss, Joe Bonanno, unexpectedly lamb-chopped it for a while without letting most of his family know.
Nice.
And was forced into retirement. The Bonannos also lost their seat on the commission when they let Joe Pistone, aka Donnie Brasco, infiltrate them, so they don't seem like they line up well at all with the way the Lupertazzis are portrayed. Interesting side note, the FBI did catch the real-life New Jersey mob boss on a tape saying how surprised all the families were that Joe Bonanno just left like that. From here, we get to the Colombo family, which will also be a pretty short comparison. While all five of the families did have dealings in New Jersey, the Colombos historically had the least involvement there, and other than a very shaky parallel after Persico goes to jail, or Carmine Sr. dies, and their son fights with not their son over power, there really isn't much here. Next we get to the Genovese family, which doesn't offer a lot of great parallels, but they are starting to get better. Now, of course, there are the shaky parallels, like Carmine Sr. and Lucky Luciano, which link to New Jersey through another shaky parallel between Hesh and Abner Zwillman, but the more significant figure in terms of this episode is Anthony Provenzano, also known as Tony Pro, who, like Johnny Sack, was a powerful New York gangster that operated out of New Jersey. Now, to be fair, Tony Pro actually ran a faction out of New Jersey. Johnny Sack just moved there, but between very powerful guys being in New Jersey and fairly long-standing stable leadership, we are getting closer, which brings us to the two families where some interesting comparisons and what-ifs can be made, the Luccheses and the Gambinos. Of all the families, the Luccheses have been the most active in New Jersey going back to the 50s.
Our family's been doing our Jersey business a long time with the Sopranos.
So much so that Tony Ducks Corallo had a crew there headed by Anthony Tumac Esotero to keep an eye on things. Now, this crew was a part of a New York family, but if we assume for a second they weren't for the sake of conversation, some parallels do begin to appear. Once the long-standing, more stable leadership is out of the picture after Tony Ducks went away for life, the new regime of Vic Amuso and Anthony Gaspipe Casso almost immediately started feuding with New Jersey. The Jersey crew headed by Esotero also handled the war for control of the Philly mob in the same way that the Soprano crew handled the war for control of the Lupertazzis.
They fight, we pick up any crumbs from the fallout.
But the most interesting connections are to be found with the Gambinos. Now, I know what you're thinking. Come on, we started off with that, and now you brought us back around full circle to Johnny Sack, John Gotti, and the Gambinos, but not quite. First off, I wouldn't compare Johnny Sack to John Gotti. They both may have expensive tastes, but Johnny Sack isn't the loud and boisterous presence that Gotti was. This comparison begins by paralleling Carmine Lupertazzi Sr. and Carlo Gambino. They were both long-standing, well-respected bosses who died at an old age of natural causes as free men. Now, this is where the comparison turns into an interesting what-if type scenario. Here, I think that the best parallel for Johnny Sack would actually be Emilio Delacroce, with Paul Castellano being represented in two characters, Little Carmine and Doc Santoro. In real life, Carlo Gambino named Paul Castellano his successor before dying, and fortunately for Castellano, Della Croce went along with it. The interesting what-if here is what if Carlo Gambino hadn't named a successor, like Carmine Sr. didn't, or if Della Croce wasn't such a good sport about it and decided to fight for the top spot. Johnny Sack, like Della Croce, was the more streetwise and respected of the two, whereas Castellano was perceived more as distant, unaware, and quite arrogant. Castellano's distance can be seen clearly in Little Carmine, who spent years in Florida fixing wet t-shirt contests, and some might say you can see the lack of awareness there too, but here I disagree. Despite how dumb he is, Little Carmine shows a level of awareness rarely seen in The Sopranos in recognizing that he couldn't win, and then later that it was better to pull back from the mob life a bit and go more legit. Castellano, on the other hand, was very intelligent, but his arrogance made him largely unaware of the level of threat he faced from within his own family, which is also what we see from Doc Santoro. Now, obviously you can't prove a negative, but odds are that had they gone to war, Della Croce would have come out on top, just like Johnny Sack did, but would have died of cancer shortly thereafter, just like Johnny Sack did. Had Paul Castellano taken the reins then, just like Doc Santoro did, then that leaves us with Castellano in charge and Della Croce dead, which brings us to our actual John Gotti parallel, Phil Leotardo. In real life, it's fairly well known that Della Croce largely kept Gotti in check, just like Johnny Sack did with Phil Leotardo. But once he was out of the picture, Gotti really didn't have anyone to hold him back. He used his future underboss, Sammy the Bull Gravano, represented in this analogy by Butch, to execute a hit on Paul Castellano in public. From here, John Gotti's reign was short, tumultuous, and eventually brought down when his underboss, Sammy the Bull, turned on him after being given a reason to fear for his life.
Listen, kid, when this is over, we're going to sit down. Me and you.
I hope so.
Of course, Butchie didn't testify against Phil. He gave New Jersey permission to kill him, but the parallel is still pretty solid. However, it doesn't account for the fact that Phil hated New Jersey, whereas Gotti was on fairly good terms with them, and the difference there is the veto situation. Now, there are several theories as to why this was such a big deal to Phil, but that's a topic for a different episode. Either way, it explains why Phil had a hatred of New Jersey that Gotti didn't, but it's important to note here that Gotti didn't really like New Jersey. He viewed them as inferior and simply a means to an end.
In 1989, John Gotti, the biggest boss in the New York Mafia, wanted the Jersey mob to do him a favor.
John Gotti always kind of looked at the Cavalcanti family as a Jersey moral or something. And so Gotti reached out to the Cavalcanti family, the farmers, and asked them to do a little piece of work.
Which is pretty much how Phil would have viewed them had it not been for the veto situation. Again, The Sopranos is fiction and the Lupertazzi are a fictional family, but I am curious to hear your thoughts on these connections and if you can think of any that I had missed, so let me know down in the comments. Well, thanks for watching this episode here on Bully Whispers. As always, like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you at the next score.